Trump has a great line of shit, but where are the bricks and mortar? That's a quote from The Art of the Deal, the book Donald Trump co-wrote with journalist Tony Schwartz back in 1987. Even then, Trump admitted that his critics had a point, that his grand promises could amount to little more than empty boasting. Today, in the increasingly changing world, we find ourselves more than ever enveloped in the US politics. No matter the country you live in, your everyday life is greatly affected by the decisions that are coming from the man who believes that deals can achieve anything. But can they really? And what makes the deal an art? This episode of our book series is a bit unusual. We're not just focusing on the book's subject, but on its author. We navigated 300 pages of ego and self-glorification to draw a few key parallels between Trump the businessman and Trump the politician. What kind of a deal might the world on the edge of the global war expect with Trump as a broker? What were his actual achievements? And what clues does the book offer us today? Surprisingly, there is a lot to unpack. And even the common argument that Donald Trump didn't write the book himself doesn't really matter. What counts is the story he chose to tell. Schwartz might now say that he just put a lipstick on a pig, but the book clearly reflects Trump's voice and his carefully crafted, yet extreme version of reality. And you'll see that for yourself in a moment, right after you hit like and subscribe, of course. The first clue comes early in the book. A passing mention of one of Trump's artist friend who called him during, of course, an extraordinarily successful workday. This friend, Trump says, once showed him how he could make a lot of money in just a few minutes by splashing oil on a canvas, with no real creative effort. As long as a painting had his name on it, people were happy to pay well. I've always felt that a lot of modern art is a con, and that the most successful painters are often better salesmen and promoters than they are artists. This brief story occupies less than a page and is sandwiched between a conversation with a Fortune journalist and a discussion about a development project on the West Side. It's easy to miss, but it's a telling moment. By calling deal-making an art and drawing a parallel to this kind of fast food painting, Trump is giving us a hint. In his world, success isn't about substance. It's about presentation. And the path to making deals, he suggests, might work in some cases. But in many truly high-stakes situations, it can be just a fiction, as the splashy canvases his friend sells. And people who can see through the lies can easily take advantage of them. In Trump's world, every conversation is crucial, and every deal is a triumph. He claims to have outsmarted the toughest, most terrifying people on the planet, though in reality they were just New York businessmen. Not quite the world's most influential and truly vicious people he'd later have to deal with as a president. Trump constantly speaks in superlatives: the biggest, the best, the most. As if he lives in a world of extremes, a trait often linked with dramatic personality types. Only they feel the deepest emotions, face the smartest allies and the most dangerous enemies. Trump, the businessman, doesn't deny this habit of exaggeration. In fact, he calls it part of his method. The final key to the way I promote is bravado. I play to people's fantasies. That is why a little hyperbole never hurts. People want to believe that something is the biggest, the greatest, and the most spectacular. He even traces this flair for drama to his mother, saying she had a gift to the grand and theatrical. But for Trump, exaggeration isn't the goal, it's a means to an end. His true aim is to transfer his confidence into others. If they believe in him, he considers that a success. He always finds a logical excuse for his overstatements. Like here, I couldn't sell him on my experience or accomplishments. So instead, I sold him on my energy and enthusiasm. I probably oversold myself. I had no other choice. I was 27 and I'd never built anything in Manhattan, nor had my father. Trump treats the reader the same way he treats potential partners. He tries to impress through relentless self-promotion. Even the intense work week described at the start of the book doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Monday's 10 phone calls included chatting with his sister, a message on his answering machine, and a conversation with his 9-year-old son. He also goes out of his way to make people believe his projects are nearing completion, even if they're far from it. One example borders on comedy. In 1982, when trying to impress the board of Holiday Inns, Trump staged a construction show. The site was essentially empty, but he ordered bulldozers and trucks to move dirt around just for show. What the bulldozers and dump trucks did wasn't important, I said, so long as they did a lot of it. If they got some actual work accomplished, all the better. But if necessary, he should have the bulldozers dig up dirt from one side of the site and dump it on the other. And it worked. The board members were thrilled and quickly signed the deal. Now, we're not trying to draw direct parallels to the worldwide peace process, but they're hard to ignore. There's a clear pattern of simulating intense activity while underestimating the other side. And bluffing a corporate board is one thing. Bluffing a bloodthirsty maniac who's already sacrificed hundreds of thousands of lives, that's something else entirely. Trump's book offers plenty of parallels to his current peace efforts, especially in how he pursues goals and negotiates with different players. As a developer, just like now as a politician, Trump often worked as if he were assembling a complex puzzle. He had to deal with multiple independent parties, each with the power to make or break his plans. He'd promise something to one group without knowing whether a third party would cooperate to make it happen. I told the owners of the sites that I was prepared to make a fair deal. I pointed out that I had a strong track record and suggested I might be the only person still willing to put this deal together. If they couldn't agree with me, they might be sitting on this property for years. Already then, Trump was using poker lingo, talking about bluffing without strong hands. So perhaps before trying to identify their trump cards, his counterparts should have asked, does he even have any? His own admission in The Art of the Deal suggests otherwise. Back then, his stakeholders were banks and local officials. The banks wouldn't lend money without tax breaks, and the officials wouldn't approve tax breaks without financing. Now one side of the table is Russia, promising not to shoot, and the other is Ukraine, which has no reason to trust them. And judging by the current progress, someone was far too confident to think these are equally difficult deals. Trump's old success formula was clear: never let your partner see how badly you won the deal. Better yet, create leverage. Make them believe you have something they want or can't do without. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case, which is why leverage often requires imagination and salesmanship, writes Trump. In other words, you have to convince the other guy it's in his interest to make the deal. Sounds familiar? We've heard US officials say that American ownership of Ukrainian power plants would offer the best protection for Ukraine's energy system. Not "we want your plants," but "your plants need us." A classic Trump framing, and the profit is obvious. That's the softer version. It gets much harsher when Trump uses bad alternatives as a form of pressure. The tariff chaos created by the new White House administration is nothing but a means of creating negotiation leverage. You don't need to read his book to recognize these tactics, but once you have, the parallels are glaring. I showed Hoeing the two models. One, a magnificent building, which is essentially the design of Trump Tower today. The other, my hideous alternative. I'm offering you $5 million, I said to Walter Hoeing, to let me preserve Tiffany. In return, you're selling me something, air rights, that you'd never use anyway. Or this one. I had there prepare a model of the as of right building to show city planning. It was hideous. A thin little four-sided box going straight up 80 stories, cantilevering over Tiffany's. We took the position that if the city wouldn't approve the building we wanted, we were prepared to build as of right, and we showed them the model and the renderings. Naturally, they were horrified. I'm not sure they believed we'd ever build it, or even that it was buildable. But there was no way they could be sure. Needless to say, not everyone is convinced that those crazy tariffs were grounded in reality. But when it comes to models and promo materials, Trump knows his stuff. The most cynical and somehow most Trump-like example comes from a failed eviction plan. Trump has bought a luxury building on Park Avenue, but many wealthy tenants live there on cheap, unfair leases. He wanted them out, but without risking legal battles. So he turned to his favorite strategy: cost cutting. There was a telephone in the lobby, not a paid telephone, but a free telephone. It was supposed to be for emergencies. It turned out that some tenants were using the phone to call their friends in Gstaad or St. Moritz. The doormen were taking out of their fancy uniforms. That saved a small fortune in dry cleaning bills. To ensure security, the doormen stopped leaving the door to meet tenants halfway down the streets to carry their packages. High wattage lights in the hallways were replaced with lower wattage bulbs, because as any cost-conscious landlord will tell you, that alone saves many thousands of dollars a year in electric bills. What we didn't anticipate was that the tenants would try to use the fact that we were running the building more efficiently as evidence that we were harassing them and making their lives intolerable. Sounds familiar? The Trump who slashed costs in Park Avenue buildings is the same who eagerly pulls the US out of international organizations he claims are robbing America. If you'd like to hear a separate overview of how his decisions impact US soft power, please let us know in the comments. And in 1982, he took it a step further. Trump offered to house homeless people in those same apartments to spook the wealthy tenants. I'm not going to pretend that it bothered me to imagine the very wealthy tenants of 100 Central Park South having to live alongside people less fortunate than themselves for a while. At the same time, I genuinely felt it was a shame not to make use of a few vacant apartments when the streets were filled with homeless people. In short, Trump's method is to create problems and, if needed, performatively solve them. Does this remind you of anything? Throughout the book, Trump repeatedly explains how he manipulates emotions like responsibility, fear, and guilt in his counterparts. He makes sure to sound disappointed or wounded, but without losing control. If he senses someone might break under pressure, he holds back. If not, he admits he might yell and stomp his feet. He threatens lawsuits, accuses people of driving others to suicide. Yet, interestingly, he insists he never takes criticism personally. At least he wants to assure the reader of this. He dismisses public attacks on himself as just political games. Everyone pushing their own agenda. And sometimes he even hires people who once opposed him, if he thinks they're talented. Trump claims he can be detached enough to understand his opponent's arguments. In fact, he says that if he were in their place, he'd probably make the same ones. You're better off dealing with a total killer with real passion. When he says no, sometimes you can talk him out of it. You rant and you rave, and he rants and raves back, and you end up making a deal. But when a machine says no, it's very tough. But if we try to map out a hierarchy of who earns Trump's respect, it might look like this: his relatives, top-level executives, hired specialists, and at very bottom, consulting companies. And between each level, a wide gulf. From only a close relative can you trust like yourself to I like consultants even less than committees. The moral virtues of those he entrusts with key position take a back seat if they handle their work. If someone steals from the company's funeral fund but crushes their sales targets, Trump might still admire them. One more telling insight: if Trump really likes someone, he struggles to tell them no directly. But behind their back, that's another story. Like slipping a disadvantageous clause into a contract while your business partner is climbing a mountain in Nepal without cell service. That's pure Trump. Trump often tries to create the impression that saying no to him is a losing strategy. Every time someone refuses his offer, he comes back with a lower one. A house he once offered $15 million for? The next offer will be less. He says that sometimes the most profitable investment is the one you didn't make. Well, he has a point there. He prides himself on trusting intuition and considers it normal to refuse additional expenses simply because he's tired of them. On the surface, the US president doesn't seem like a reckless risk-taker. He claims to weigh his chances of failure and always ask, "Can I survive the loss?" If there is a chance to get something for free and still make a small profit, he'd rather take that than chase a big win with uncertain payoffs. But there is a twist. He also admits that if he senses someone is trying to squeeze him, he is ready to throw caution out of the window and spend aggressively just to win. The problem is this book is written entirely in the first person. It's a performance. So it's hard to tell when we're getting a sincere self-assessment and when we're just hearing a carefully crafted image. Often, his claims contradict one another. Early in the book, Trump says he always keeps multiple options open and never bets on a single strategy. But by the end, he proudly claims, "I never had a master plan. I just got fed up one day and decided to do something about it." So, which is it? Is he constantly planning several moves ahead or just improvising as he goes? Where do you think he's more sincere? A separate important trait of Trump's persona is his deep respect for powerful media and his sharp understanding of how much influence they wield. He calls the New York Times one of the most influential institutions in the world. In Trump's view, even negative press can be good for business. He repeats this idea often. For example, he tells the story of being slammed by the media for demolishing historic bas-reliefs. But he was thrilled. Why? Because all the attention was on Trump Tower, and according to him, it helped drive up apartment prices. One thing I've learned about the press is that they're always hungry for a good story, and the more sensational, the better. It's the nature of the job, and I understand that. The point is that if you are a little different or a little outrageous, or if you do things that are bold or controversial, the press is going to write about you. Knowing this, Trump often plays into media logic, sometimes by deliberately misleading journalists. He boasts, for instance, that he could build a convention center for half the government's estimate. Or more recently, that he could end a major war in just 24 hours. But in typical Trump fashion, he eventually contradicts himself. Yes, you can exaggerate, he says, but if you don't deliver, people will catch on. And once they lost trust, it's hard to win back. Trump doesn't just monitor the media, he engages with it directly. He used to write personal letters to journalists in response to their criticism. His logic? If they're allowed to criticize him publicly, why shouldn't he reply in kind? And overall, Trump is convinced that his personal touch with the media is more effective than any team of PR consultants. He believes he can grab headlines better than they ever could. Usually we say even if we review a book critically, you should still read it yourself and form your own opinion. But not this time. Honestly, it's far more interesting to read books about Trump, like the ones by Bob Woodward, than to read anything with Trump's name listed as an author. And before I forget, drop your suggestions for future reads in the comments. And while you are there, you can also subscribe to the channel. So, can I sincerely recommend The Art of the Deal? Not really, unless you're on a negotiating team working under the White House flag. In that case, the book should live in your desk, like a holy text. You should know every technique and principle of this dramatic air dealer by heart and keep your footing, no matter how theatrical it gets. The trick is to ignore all the egocentric chest thumping. Lines like, "I set big goals and act decisively," or "I've always prided myself on being able to get out of any delicate situation," and "I've been used to thinking big since my youth." Even when Trump admits to being part of the problem, it's never a real fault. It's because I spoke too confidently and clearly. In short, his only flaw is that he's too smart and too good looking. But there is one curious passage in the book, a kind of accidental prediction. While listing the elite clients of Trump Tower, he mentions wealthy French citizens fleeing to the US, worried that their new president, François Mitterrand, would ruin France's economy due to great uncertainty in his policies. It wasn't just that Mitterrand was a socialist, or that he began nationalizing larger companies. It was also that he turned out to be a dangerous man. What can you say about a guy who goes around selling nuclear technology to the highest bidder? It's the lowest anyone can stoop. I'll leave the following clip with no commentary. Just a little aftertaste for those of you who stuck around to the end. See you soon, and don't forget to stay far from extremes.
I don't like making deals. Do you understand? I love making deals. I love making deals. The bigger, the better.
But to what end?
To what end? Deals are the end. I mean, that's like asking Da Vinci why he painted the Mona Lisa.
Consider yourself an artist.
Well, I am an artist, Tony, and deals are my art form. Look, making deals is an art form, and I want to put this in the book. It's something that you're born with. You either have it or you don't have it, okay? And if you don't have it, don't do deals. Just get a beautiful job, have a nice family, and relax.